I have not changed my mind about the fact that I think ambition is something positive. One of the key ingredients to a good leader is to say no as often as possible.
Martin, welcome to the show. What are some of the innovations that you're working on at ANCA that you're most excited about?
Automation in our core business, which is making tools that cut metal. The automation in that kind of environment is challenging. To make that tool making more automated we can make more tools cheaper.
People in those teams may see it as a threat.
Quite surprisingly, that wasn't one of the resistance that we saw and that we felt. It makes your job more interesting. How can I get more out of this machine? How can I get more productivity? I think that's where we're heading.
You're the CEO. You've come in, you've put your framework in place, you've defined, you've aligned, you've assigned.
And defended.
You're now defending.
The role of a leader is to disrupt the team, the organization, drive those innovations through. The Germans believe that feedback is an underappreciated tool, especially negative feedback, because the belief is that if you don't care about somebody, you wouldn't critique them in the first place.
Martin, welcome to the show.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning to you.
Yes, and before we jump in, you've led teams around the world, worked for a very impressive CV, some huge companies. Now you're the CEO of ANCA. Leaders are told to stay focused, but also to disrupt and reinvent. Those sound perhaps counterintuitive. How do you, as a leader, balance those?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Well, let's first talk about focus, right? So I think in a world of distractions that we live in today, focus is an underappreciated art for a leader to rally the team, inspire the next level to really drive the organization forward towards a shared focused objective. And so, I call it the DAAD methodology, if you wish, define, align, assign, and then defend, where we usually spend a lot of time on defining goals, objectives, then assigning them, aligning them, assigning them to people. But the large majority of work, at least in my experience and my lived experience, is to defend those priorities then afterwards, right? So the last D of the DAAD is really the bit that usually gets organizations offside. Defend against interferences, defend against changes that come from the market, resistance from internal, etc., etc. And so to really stay focused is obviously one of the first roles of a leader. Yeah. Then when it comes to disruption, look, I love disruption. We joked before that it's quite interesting to see the resistance to change, the lack of what I call open growth mindset that many people bring to the workplace. And so, the role of a leader is to disrupt. The role of the leader is to, poke the team, the organization, and drive those innovations through. And, I am sometimes mystified to a certain extent by how, especially the younger generation, if I can say, I don't consider myself old quite yet, but, we're getting there. Younger generation is resistant to change. I thought with technology or the digital natives, as we sometimes call them, would be very open to new ways of working, new tools, new procedures, processes, new approaches. But I find them sometimes more resisting to change than the more experienced workers and employees. And I've noted that especially around AI of late, where in many organizations that I'm familiar with, they're struggling a fair bit fully benefit from artificial intelligence. Now, without going into AI in depth, I just noted as a new way of working and found the resistance quite interesting.
Yeah, completely. There was a lot there for us to sort of unpack. I just want to go back to the framework you introduced us to at the beginning. So that was define, align, assign, and defend.
Correct.
Really interesting.
Well done.
Really, really interesting. How did you sort of put that framework together, and when did that really sort of crystallize for you?
Well, I think, when you get into, and I've led a number of organizations, and you come in and usually you find that there's not a clarity of where are we going, and then, are these different objectives aligned? Are they assigned, and are the roles clear to reach them? So it's really, 101 foundational leadership, I would think. And I found that in a lot of organizations that I got thrown into or chose to join, those define, align, assign were not properly done. So that's the first thing, and it's really, kind of basics, I think, of organizational leadership. But the last D, the defend, really came to me over the years, where it's easy to sit there and say, well, let's go this direction, but then to make sure that you're consistently measuring your progress towards that direction, to consistently ensure that there's not too many distractions, customer demands coming in, last minute changes, additional functionalities in a product, disruptions in supply chains, you name it, right? I mean, there's no shortage in our world of disruptions. And so then to stay focused, stay clear, measure progress, the small it may be, never discourage anybody who makes progress towards a shared and agreed goal. That defend really becomes very important. And I think it's where 80% of the energy should then ultimately be, put into defend that you are making progress to this. It's too easy to then just say, let's just change and pivot. I think in the startup world, scale-up world, they call it pivot. And it has its place. It has its place. But in an established organization where you've worked to define that shared kind of focus and priority, you've got to defend that and stay the course for a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah. Well, why do you think, like you say, the first three stages seem to be reasonably well understood and reasonably well done in most places? Why do you think the defend part is so challenging for executives when it comes to strategy and focus?
I think because, for one, you become over the years better at saying no. I think ultimately one of the key ingredients to a good leader is to say no as often as possible. Not to obviously cause pain, annoy people, but because that means you are staying away from those distractions. You got to get really good at saying no. So your question is why you have to spend so much time on defending. I think it's just the world we're living in. We're consuming an enormous amount of data every day. I think recently I came across that a human digests some 7 gigabytes of data in a day. I assume that includes the visual data as well, but still it sounds like a lot, for the brain chip to process through. And probably for many people, they're reaching capacity now in terms of digesting the news cycle, the TikTok, Instagram, Facebook cycle, wherever people get their information from. And so all these data points that are coming in, will probably give you ideas of what could be done, which direction should be going. I've seen a lot of times that, especially younger leaders react very quickly. to new information. So we spoke to XYZ company, and they really liked it. And I said, well, who did like it? Well, the one that's holding the budget, or the one that you just bumped into in the elevator? Well, the one that in the elevator, right? Okay, that's interesting, but let's not react to one voice out of 100,000 employees, right? Let's just go back to where are we going? What's our direction? And that's what I call defend, right? To make sure we are back on track and back in that agreed direction. So probably underestimated, but I think, very important.
Yeah. I always think about a leader as well, perhaps trying to intervene too much is sometimes risky. And I always remember back, we're two Europeans, so maybe we can talk about a soccer analogy here.
Munich all the way, yes.
So I was at a Manchester United, Manchester City derby game. This was when Jose Mourinho was the Manchester United manager. Manchester United were 2-0 down, but they were playing quite well. And they got the game back to 2-1. And Jose, being Jose, wanted to get involved and have his influence and do too much. And he made the changes. They lost all the momentum, and then City scored again and went on to win the game. And I always remember just kind of remembering that moment as a bit of a leadership lesson, which is, like you said, perhaps don't overreact too soon.
Well, I guess, micromanagement for me is one of the worst forms of leadership. And I'm not sure whether that was the case. I'm not familiar with that specific situation at Manchester, but to delegate responsibility, accountability to your junior leaders is incredibly important. Obviously, we know that developing younger leaders is important. That's one of the reasons why we're here. Recently came across statistics that 80% of organizations know that they've got an obligation to develop middle managers and the younger leaders, but only 10% or just below 10% of organizations do it actually in a structured way. And, coming from running and managing a lot of technical organizations, I found that especially in engineering-heavy organizations, true inspiring leadership and the development of young leaders is an underappreciated art. Typically the best engineer, the one that is the brightest designer, mechanical designer, the one that knows the standards the best, gets usually the tap on the shoulder, and rather than making him a technical leader, becomes a people leader. And more often than not, in my lived experience, more often than not, that doesn't go so well, at least in the early stages. Doesn't mean that they cannot learn, but I do believe that leadership is a noble pursuit. That is typically linked to lifelong learning. Very few people are born with all the skill sets that are required to be a good leader and be an inspiring, motivating, purposeful leader. And so the development, the continuous learning of new skills, new approaches, the growth mindset, the openness to new ideas and new ways of energizing the organization, energizing teams and individuals is underappreciated in most technical organizations that I've been in. That's an observation I've clearly made.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that. With the very last episode we filmed was with a guy called Vern Harnish, CEO of a group called Scaling Up. Mm-hmm. He talked about promoting horizontally as opposed to vertically, which is exactly what you were just talking about. The best engineer doesn't necessarily become the best manager of engineers. So it was a really interesting analogy to hear that.
Yeah, and I think there's value in both, right? What I often find that organizations undervalue the technical leadership. But that's usually where a lot of value is created from a technical perspective, product innovation perspective.
Yeah.
The value of a human leader is, of course, inspiring the team, following that DAAD principle of define the objective, the directions of the organization, and align, assign, and defend. But both have a place and should be valued. It shouldn't always be, well, you're really good at this technically, so let's promote you into a human leadership role, because as I said before, very often doesn't really work out in the early stages, at least.
Yeah, it can create a lot of stress for everybody involved, including the person who's been promoted, who's not quite ready for it.
Absolutely. I can recall 2 situations in Canada where people that got promoted came back and said, I don't want this, put me back to where I was.
Really?
It puts too much stress on me. I'm not a people person. And you find, actually, I'm an engineer myself, so I can say this without too much heat in the comment section of the podcast. But, there are just some people who are really comfortable and happy working on their own. Being really deep into a subject. Not everybody has to be a generalist, or thank God, not everybody is a generalist, and not everybody is inclined to inspire and lead humans. And there's got to be room for growth for those individuals. They're incredibly important to the organization and to the trajectory of product innovations, new services, you name it.
Yeah. And the other area you and I really wanted to talk about was innovation. We've started to touch on it there. A lot of companies seem to kind of innovate in small steps, almost sort of safe, incremental tweaks. But true disruption really takes a different mindset and approach. In your experience and vast experience across some huge organizations, why do you think it's so hard for established companies to push through real disruption and innovation?
Well, I guess, the way I see innovation is it's this iterative process that, again, we're getting back to engineers. Engineers are really good at, right? Engineers learn to improve by 2%. Whatever feature, ever product feature. I'm thinking of one of my first employers was Mercedes-Benz, and if we would define the specs, the specifications for the next generation of car, you would say it's going to be X% quieter, it's going to be 5% faster, it's going to be more fuel efficient, and so on and so forth, right? And so I think a lot of innovation is driven to that, what I call iterative approach. Now, as you've seen with the combustion engine, or as you will see in many other industries, there's these iterative changes that get flatter and flatter. Think of the iPhone from 3 to 4, massive steps. Now we're 15 to 16 or 16 to 17. I don't even know.
Mm.
I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference. I don't think anybody can really, except for the super Apple nerds. What's the difference? So you've got diminishing returns because technology gets so good that there's really very little to be gained. And I've seen it in many, many areas that stick with the iPhone. Now the next innovation is going to be something really disruptive. I'd assume it's a phone that sits in your ear. Doesn't even have a screen, or maybe the screen is on your sunnies, your sunglasses, or maybe it's a brain chip. Maybe in 10 years' time, it's merging with Elon Musk's ventures and it becomes a brain chip, and the phone is gone. It's super disruptive, but you've got a whole organization that has worked on iPhone generation after iPhone generation, right? Think of the car manufacturers, and I'm at pain to say when I saw the slowness of the German automotive sector reacting to electric vehicles. Exactly that. They've been improving the vehicles for more than 100 years, very mature industry. We came down from, 9.2 liters on 100 consumption to 9.1 and then to 9.0 and then to 8.95, and diminishing returns in terms of, driving the innovation, pushing harder and harder. The next step was electric vehicles, or I believe it is electric vehicles, because of, and without making this a political discussion, electric vehicle has 2,500 parts at the most compared to a combustion car, which typically has between 8 and 10,000 parts, right? So just from that point alone, you'd say probably makes sense to go electric, right? But look at the established car manufacturers. Won't name them here. They all struggled. They all had procedures, people, just this habit of making it 2% better. They couldn't disrupt, or let's say they struggle to disrupt, and they continue to struggle to disrupt. And I think, why is it that organizations are struggling with it? I think typically because they don't put that new disruptive idea into its own ecosystem. If you allow me another example, early on at Mercedes, we had a project called Smart, Smart Car. It's a very small, a city two-seater that can park sideways. You remember that? And it, to a certain extent, it was a great success. But one of the things that Mercedes, I think very smartly decided at the time was, then we cannot do this in the established organization. We cannot. Our quality manuals, 8,000 pages. If we give, a budget to a young team of engineers to develop a car that is completely disrupting the way we're doing things. Yeah. It had a plastic bumper that you could swap with two screws. It was just click on, click off.
I didn't know it was Mercedes. I'm learning now it was Mercedes, which just proves your point. Yeah. Okay.
In collaboration with a Swiss guy called Hayek, if I remember correctly, but he was behind the Swiss watch. It was out of plastic, and so he was disrupting the Swiss watch industry by approaching it from a completely different angle. Not expensive and hard metal, but soft plastic and funky and colorful. Yeah. And so they came together. And the way that Smart was set up was basically a new site, a greenfield site, a new team, no manuals, no procedures, just a budget and an objective, full stop, right? And so for me, that was, very instructive at the time. I was a young executive at Mercedes, and to see that you got to take sometimes things out of the normal organization to succeed. Hence, that's why I was quite surprised that none of the established car manufacturers had taken that idea of EV. Well, none is wrong, but very few had taken that idea of EV and put it into a separate brand. Give a new team an objective. You can't turn somebody who's worked 25 years on combustion engines into an electronics engineer. You can, but at huge cost. And quite frankly, that's not where they want to be. That's not what they've learned. And so you're better off setting up a new team on the side. And very few have done that. And so when I look today, no wonder they're 10 years behind, 12 years behind the 8 ball on electric vehicles. Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, I know I'm biased. I won't make advertisement for my favorite brand in EV, but yeah.
For leaders listening to this who want to be running companies that are being disruptive and innovative, and you talked there about perhaps the concept of creating a sort of new team, new brand. Is there anything else executives can be doing to really sort of encourage that innovation and not be held back by perhaps that fixed mindset that you've alluded to that can easily exist?
Well, I guess at a senior level, you wanna choose disrupting mindsets, right? So you want to choose to certain. what I find again fairly often, I think it's human, right? You are looking for people that look like you, smell like you, have probably been to the same university, have similar backgrounds, but the real strength is in the diversity, right? And for me, diversity has many, many dimensions. So I think, to bring this down to gender, it is just too reductive. There's so many different, dimensions of diversity. And so, for example, I love to work with contrarians. I consider myself contrarian. So those are the people, the painful people that always look at it from the other angle. That always go, yeah, but. And I know it's painful, and I'm one of them. I apologize, but to not follow too quickly what I call the herd. And I do believe the herd very quickly, especially with social media, comes to opinions sometimes where you're saying, hold on a second, is that really what we all believe? And so I'm looking for the one that's saying, well, no, I see that differently. And the moment I see somebody like that, I usually, prefer to have them in the team than somebody that looks like me and smells like me in a sense, because they're going to be the ones that ask the uncomfortable questions. They're going to be the ones that challenge the thinking. And so when you are a senior leader in an organization, look for those who disrupt, look for those who disagree, of course, respectfully. Look for those who challenge your own views. Nothing is worse, apart from micromanagers, are sycophants. People who always just say what the boss wants to hear. The worst type of junior leaders you can have. And so, if you're a junior leader listening to this, you want to sharpen your edge on just being that critical question. Wondering whether it could be done differently. There's always a better way. There's always other options, other alternative ways to approach a certain challenge. And so, I'm looking for people who, have pride in disagreeing respectfully. Of course, it's best when they come with a solution or an idea, of what a solution could be, and not just the criticism of, I think this is going to go and fail. Thank you, John, but how would you do it? So, as a senior leader, I look for those dissenting voices. And as a junior leader, I think to exercise yourself in, being self-reflective, being critical with yourself, your organization, with the approach that the organization took, do lots of lessons learned, be open to feedback, positive as well as negative. The Germans believe that feedback is an underappreciated tool, especially negative feedback, because the belief is that if you don't care about somebody, you wouldn't critique them in the first place. So you must care about the person, the situation, the outcome, if you're critiquing somebody. So, let's call it feedback in the English language. And I think those who want to challenge, want to reflect, want to give constructive feedback, I think are the ones that are going to, grow up to be those senior leaders that we need in society.
Yeah. If we just now kind of circle this all the way back to the top, you're the CEO, you've come in, you've put your framework in place, you've defined, you've aligned, you've assigned.
And defended.
You're now defending.
Yep.
And one of these leaders comes to you with a disruptive idea or some sort of feedback on what it is that's going on. What does that conversation look like? How do you manage that?
I think, well, first and foremost, you got to be open, right? And I mean, after everything I've said, I've got to be open to the feedback. I put it in several categories, which is typically you've heard it before. You've heard the criticism before when it's a personal feedback. But let's take that and put that aside. If it's feedback about how the organization, how the team went about something, I think you've got to, take a moment digest the information and reflect on whether there's some merit to it. I like most the feedback, as I said before, that comes with some kind of ideas of how it could have been done better. The simple criticism of saying, that was not good. I knew it would fail. Saying, well, the reason why we appreciate having you in our team is because we also expect you to, come up with what could we have done better. And so, but assuming that it's brought or it comes across as constructive criticism with an idea to improvement, I think you've got to be open and saying, yeah, great, that's a good idea. Let's do it next year, in the next cycle. Typically things come back, an organization or organizations in general. I mean, a lot of things come back. Again, it's the benefit of, having more experience is that you've seen it all before, different shades of gray, but, stuff keeps on coming back in similar problems, similar challenges seem to come back. And so, great opportunity to approach it from a new angle the next time. Ideally, I'll make the one that brings a suggestion responsible for implementation because, that puts that accountability on the individual, right? Yeah. Again, it's very easy to, in France, we call it alarmiste, that's the individual that always has the hand on the bell and says, alarm, 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 this is going to fail. This is going to crash. This is going to lose us money. That's an easy position to take. I remember one individual especially who literally every day had an alarm. And, I said to him at one point, it's quite easy to go about your day job like that, because if it happens and it fails, you can say, I told you so. If it doesn't happen, you can say, well, thank God I told you there was a risk it would fail so that you could course correct and avoid the disaster, right? And so I'm saying, look, that's not enough. I need a little bit more than just constant, something is going to happen, kind of alarmism, as I'm not sure whether that's an English word, but let's make it an English word.
It is now, yeah. What are some of the innovations that you're working on at ANCA that you're most excited about?
Quite a few. I mean, the one that we can talk about is probably automation, and it's not an innovation that will surprise many listeners, but automation in our core business, which is, making cutting tools or making tools that cut metal. The iPhone, for example, is cut with our tools. Many other hard things out of metal and extremely hard metal are cut with our tools. But the automation in that kind of environment is challenging. It's an environment where you've got all the factors. You've got humans around. You've got oil spills. You've got all kinds of unexpected situations that the automation system has to deal with. And so we are quite excited about it because to make tools obviously is foundational to many advanced economies and many advanced manufacturers. And to make that tool making more automated we can make more tools cheaper, more precise tools as well. We're now in the micron range, single digit micron range in terms of tool precision. Just to give you an order of magnitude, a human hair has about 70 micron across. We make tools that have about 50 micron in diameter, but those tools have cutting edges and all kinds of features. So it gets quite intricate when you look under the microscope at the tool, and you can only marvel at the engineering genius, that got it to that level. But to automate that is quite challenging. We've made really good progress the last 2-3 years, and so we are very excited to see some of our customers run their operations 24/7, manufacturing those tools in factories that are literally lights out, so no humans anymore. Fascinating to see how automation can take hold in areas where you wouldn't have thought it could. So very excited about that.
Automation, like you say, that's something that's being discussed across different companies, different industries. But again, I can imagine it's an extremely tough innovation to pursue, because a lot of the people who are currently in those teams may see it as a threat, right, to their positions, and you can get some of that fixed thinking that we talked about before. Perhaps is that something you've encountered, and how have you dealt with that, if so?
Interesting. Well, actually, I thought and we thought it would be a resistance, but it wasn't. It was the other way around. So we literally had people saying, we don't want to get up on a Saturday morning and work in a day shift. We'd rather have the robots do it. We had people saying we'd rather program the automation system and have those higher level tasks and be the master of the robots, so to speak, than do it ourselves. And so with declining workforces in many areas, especially when it comes to people that run CNC machines, quite surprisingly, that wasn't one of the resistance that we saw and that we felt. We even had a lot of union support on automation, which I thought was originally I had the same approach and said, well, will they be concerned? But no, the opposite was true, because it makes your job more interesting. Right? It makes it a lot more interesting to look at how can I get more out of this machine, how can I get more productivity and output, rather than doing it manually yourself. So I compared a little bit to my Thermomix, another advertisement. Thermomix in the kitchen, I press a button, walk away, and then the risotto is done, a couple of minutes later.
Yeah, no, completely. That's really good to hear, and it makes perfect sense. Ultimately, people will become more productive if they're working with those machines and automations.
Yeah, and I guess at one point in my career, I worked for Airbus and with Airbus, and we look at the cockpit and look at how we have, in the meantime, or actually already last 20 years, really optimized the human-machine interface in the cockpit, where the bots do the stuff they're really good at, and the humans have that kind of conductor supervisor role in the cockpit to make sure that nothing goes wrong.
Yeah.
There's still an element of human decision making in it, but let's also be honest about the fact that 98% of the tasks in the cockpit are in the meantime done by the bots, so that's shown me fairly early on that if you design that interface properly and mature the automation system, and that's, I think, in some incidences, we see it for autonomous driving, for example, to mature that system, it's challenging, right? Because you've got a lot of unexpected inputs and unexpected situations and millions, if not billions, of different situations that the bot has to deal with. To get that right will take time, will require a lot of engineering hours, and that maturity will come over time. But I think that's where we're heading.
I think so too. And again, another recent guest said to me, I don't know how we got onto the topic of air traffic safety, and the stats were quite clear in terms of, like you said, a lot of it's become more automated. It's also become a lot safer. I know we still get the odd news story about a plane that's gone down, but the numbers are not even close. Like it's improved so much. And that's probably
Well, look. I mean, again, it's interesting you say that, right? Because it's back to the resistance to change. I remember chat groups in the 2010s, so that's 15 years ago, where people would say, "Never ever would I drive an autonomous vehicle," and so on and so forth, right? And it's quite interesting how long the large majority of humans need to get on board. Although yes, there's a learning curve, and yes, there will be mistakes made. But how obvious is it that humans are distracted? Probably, hopefully not, but have a beer too much, lay on their phone,
on their phone always.
tired, and so on and so forth, right? And so you look at it and saying, how obvious is it that the bot is going to be a more reliable driver than the humans? And again, I'm probably going to get some heat on this, but it is just a fact.
Yeah. Anyone who's been in a Waymo, have you been in one of those? Yeah.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
Best ride of my life. Never felt that when it took off. That first bit is a bit like, oh,
first 10 seconds, exactly. Yeah, I know.
What's going on here? And it approaches the lights, and the lights are red, and you're like, is it gonna? But after that, it was the smoothest ride I've ever experienced in my life, hands down. Incredible.
Yeah, and I'm using autopilot to work every day, so, and it covers about 80% of the journey. Yeah, it's not there yet, but that's not a reason not to use it, and I think we'll see that in a lot of parts of life. Again, I am talking about leadership again. I am every single time surprised how long the larger society needs to adapt to change. I would argue and say to the younger leaders listening, you got to be an agent of change. You got to be the one that leads the change. Human societies need leaders. We will go, as we all are acutely aware, we will go through, I'd say 20, 25, 30 years of tremendous change, disruptive change on a global scale. So those are the periods in human societies where we need strong leaders, we need ethical leaders, we need inspiring leaders, we need purposeful leaders. And so, I think it's a very honorable calling. And so, I commend you on your work, but also the listeners to wanting to develop their skill set. There's always something new you can learn.
And I think that's the one thing we can say for sure, right, about, like you said, the next, let's say 20 to 30 years. The only thing we can say for sure is there's going to be lots of change. The people that can work with that, embrace it, enjoy it, they're going to live through an incredible period of human history. So yeah, I really resonate with what you've said there. And as we come to the end of the episode here, we ask each guest the same two questions.
All right. Okay.
What's one thing you've changed your mind about recently, and why?
I'd probably say nuclear energy. And again, it's gonna raise the blood pressure for some, and maybe not for others. Look, I grew up in a country that was fiercely opposed to nuclear energy, and had put the energy mix very much into a ideological question of, are you this persuasion or this persuasion? And, I wouldn't say it's recent, but, fairly recent. I think you got to stay out of ideology when you come to energy. The, engineering is one of the art forms of focusing energy into products. If you look at a fork, just as a simple example, what you're looking at is basically a lot of expensed energy to mine the material, to concentrate the material, to melt the material, to form it, to shape it, to forge it, however you got to your fork. But it's, energy is the lifeblood of human societies. And to turn that into a discussion where the government says we can do this, but we can't do that, I think is wrong. So I grew up in a country that was fiercely opposed to nuclear energy. And I've certainly changed my mind on that. I think, politics should stay out of the energy mix altogether, should set the framework and the guidelines, but certainly not stop certain ways of doing things. So, yeah, that's my answer. I know it's a controversial one, but quite clearly, I'm pro-nuclear.
Yeah, super important. What's one thing you've not changed your mind about and is a belief that you hold really dear that you want to share with others?
I have not changed my mind about the fact that I think, ambition is something positive. I think when I look at the last 10 years, and I've got two boys in their early 20s, right? And when I see the hoops they had to jump through, I mean, we had sessions at school where they had to apologize to the girls for being a man or being male. Quite frankly, I think we'll look back at this and saying, really, what message are we sending? I have struggled with it. I'm still struggling with it. I will not change my mind. I think there is a great benefit for having females, or having males, or having differences between gender. That should be celebrated. It should be appreciated. Every individual brings something different to the table. To reduce that just to a gender question, and then blame one gender for certain things that have happened in the past, I think is just silly. Quite frankly, humanity got here where we are today for many, many reasons. But neither, or no group, no single gender, no single ethnicity would have gotten here without all the others. And so, I will not change my mind on my view that ambition, wanting to lead, clarity in your boundaries, clarity in the where you're going, is something you have to apologize for. And so, I would encourage anybody to plot their own path. Happiness for me comes from setting yourself or defining for yourself where you want to go and what you want to achieve, and then achieving it. That's where happiness comes from. It doesn't come from your employer typically. It doesn't come from your partner. Of course, those are all elements in your life, but happiness comes from that fulfillment of reaching an ambitious goal, setting yourself a direction and following the direction with some discipline in your personal life and in your business life. And so I will not change my view on that. And I do believe that humanity will look back at that time and saying, well, we probably, the pendulum overswung a fair bit. Hopefully it's swinging back anytime soon.
I think so. Might be a bit like when we look back at the 60s and be like, yeah, that got a bit out of hand. Maybe it'll be the same here. And I think just to sort of build on your point as well about, happiness and striving for more. I think something I've heard recently, which I really liked, is purpose. Purpose comes when you voluntarily take on responsibility.
Oh, right. Okay. That's a good one.
Yeah. And that can be, no one's going to force you to have children, for example. No one's going to force you to care for your neighbor or, do work in the community or take on that extra responsibility at work. But by doing that, which is not comfortable, but you're taking on that responsibility, it gives you purpose, gives you something to strive for. And then, like you said, you achieve those goals, and that brings happiness. And I completely agree with you.
And I think, one thing that, a very good friend of mine keeps on saying is the best is yet to come, So if you've got that optimistic kind of outlook into the future and you're saying there's still something better that will come to me if I just stay the course, disciplined, then I think that's a very powerful driver as well. But I love what you said about purpose. Fantastic.
Martin, well, if the best is yet to come, hopefully we get to do this again in the not too distant future. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
And there we have it. Martin Ripple, the CEO of ANCA. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment. More importantly, if you know someone who could benefit from some of the wisdom that Martin shared with us today, please go ahead and share the episode. I'm David Jepson. I'll see you again next time for CEO Behind the Scenes.